Welcome to Building the Future. I'm your host, Kevin Horick. I'll be interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and others that are involved in following their dreams and helping to make our world a better place. So today on the show, we have Espree Devora. She's known as the girl who gets it done. She runs We Are LA Tech and is launching the Woman in Tech podcast. So welcome to the show, Espree. Thanks for being on.
Thanks for reaching out to me on Twitter, Kevin. We're like super close digital buds that got to meet in person now. I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, and you got me writing for Tech Zulu as well. So I owe you beer, maybe, or something. I don't know.
You owe me
dinner.
Nothing. I just love Tech Zulu. We met on Twitter though, right?
We did meet on Twitter. Yeah, totally. I reached out to you.
Was it the We Are LA Tech Twitter or was it my personal Twitter?
It was your personal Twitter, but I followed you. I can't remember if it was through Justin Jackson or not. But
let's just say it was because he's awesome.
Yeah, totally. Well, I used to work with him, right? Like we used to share, not a desk, but our desks used to touch each other and look at each other all day. Yeah,
I totally didn't know that. Like I'm crazy about Justin Jackson. I think he's the coolest. Like he's one of the few people that I think really gets the fine line between being a marketer and being sleazy.
Totally. No, I totally agree. He's awesome. I worked with him for 3 years, 2.5, something like that. Yeah, he was great.
Totally jealous. I want to work with Justin Jackson.
You should. You move up to Canada and live in kind of in the mountains and buy like a huge lake.
I love Canada.
That's awesome. Really? Have you been? Where in Canada have you been?
New Brunswick.
Oh yeah, that's a nice area.
Yeah.
So
I'm all about it.
Totally.
Yeah. I want to go to Montreal one day. Oh,
that's a beautiful city. You have to have the poutine if you go there. It's so good.
Oh my gosh. Do you know Greg Eisenberg in Canada? He's like he now lives in San Francisco. He's Canadian though, and his company got acquired by Stumblepon, I believe. And anyway, great guy, and he always raves about Montreal and makes me jealous because he like gets a place there and stays for like a month, and then I just wish I was in his suitcase experiencing all the glory of Canadians.
Well, you should. It's great. Montreal's a great city. Yeah, I'm on the opposite side of the country, but yeah, it's awesome. So cool. So yeah, and like we mentioned, we actually met in person at your podcasting panel for your Digital LA event, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was totally random, man. I was like so excited to meet you in person. I felt like we had all these interactions, and then actually to see you in the flesh and you had your teammates with you, which was really neat.
Yeah, we were down for a conference at the DribbleCon at the convention center.
Yeah.
So it was good.
Dude, you're like speaking to my nerdy self. Like DribbleCon, like why didn't I know DribbleCon was going on? I would have totally gone just because it's Dribble.
Do you use it?
No, because I'm not a designer, but I love it.
All right, that's good. That's good.
I'm a core nerd and like product developer, so I'm like Dribble. Let me look.
No, sorry, Drupal. DrupalCon.
Oh, Drupal.
The CMS. Okay. Yeah.
Well, okay, I have built. So my old sports company was built in Drupal.
Oh, okay.
So I still don't. I never know whether to say Drupal or Drupal, but. Yeah, it was built in Drupal, and so no, but I wouldn't want to go to the Drupal conference.
Fair enough.
However, if Dribble has a conference. Dribble, if you're listening, hook me up.
They might.
I totally want to go.
They do have a bunch of meetups in a bunch of cities. I know that. My buddy runs one in town.
Yeah, General Assembly had a Dribble meetup, and they like gave away some. I don't know. It was like you get to win something or another with the coolest design. Dribble's rad.
Yeah, it's very cool. There's a lot of really cool stuff on there.
Yeah.
So cool. So I guess let's talk about kind of where you grew up and how you kind of got into all this stuff.
Whoa, where do I start? I grew up in LA, born and raised LA, and now I run We Are LA Tech full time, as you mentioned before. And so I'm definitely not the random person getting to LA and then trying to do something. I'm like actually from here. And I actually grew my startups in LA before there was any LA tech scene. So I'm through and through LA.
Veteran.
No combating with that, yeah. It all started, like I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur when I was like 4 years old, and I'd walk into Westwood Village with my father and see empty office buildings and daydream about what businesses I would put in them. And my dad was an early adopter with like the first cell phone and the first this and the first that. And I didn't know what an early adopter was at the time, of course, but now looking back, I'm like, oh, And I used to use Prodigy, and all the chat rooms. I'm sure that I'm not a programmer, but I'm sure I totally could have become one super easy if you just put the right thing in front of me.
Sure.
But I ended up going kind of like the product development route, and then as the years went on, I built one of the first action sports social networks. So like skateboarding, motocross, actually probably was the first, but it got hacked by who knows, and that took a while to revive that, to be able to remedy the hack. And once the hack was remedied, MySpace had like blown up and taken over. And so one of my advisors said, you have to be like the CNN of action sports. And I'm like, okay. And so I decided to merge, like with the social network, I wanted to merge my two loves, which was action sports and travel. Action sports, travel, and just nerdy things, technology,
Sure.
And so it's like, oh, let me create this website to connect people. How novel and cool, And who knew it was the future? And then so when my site was hacked and it was remedied, then by that time MySpace blew up, and this advisor said, be all things video for action sports. So I created an action sports media company shooting video of top athletes like Tony Hawk and Shaun White and Ryan Sheckler, like skateboarders and motocross, and it was just like amazing. It was absolutely amazing. We would travel everywhere shooting all these action sports athletes, and I had one of the first action sports YouTube channels, and the list goes on, but it's kind of like, action sports, travel, technology,
so
early adopter.
What year was this? Like early 2000s?
Oh, I don't even know anymore.
No.
I have no concept of time. I have no concept of time whatsoever. I don't even know what day it is today.
That's funny. Yeah, I was curious because I spent the summer in LA in 2004. I was there for 5-6 months, and I was just wondering if you were recording it, something I checked out at that point in time, but maybe maybe
I don't
not.
know. I'd have to look up my old files. I have no idea. But no, in 2004 we were still Social Network. We weren't recording then. No, because MySpace was launched in 2004. So we were either hacked or still a Social Network at that time.
Right.
Yeah. So why didn't you come say hi to me in LA in 2004? We could have been friends longer.
Yeah, we should have been. I don't know.
But you know what didn't exist? Twitter.
That's true. Twitter did not exist, and I remember it was MySpace was becoming popular, and what was Friendster? Was it? Yeah.
You know how that happens? Like Friendster had a server problem, and they were shut down, like just traffic problem or whatever. And so that's when MySpace launched and took advantage of them having server troubles, and everybody went over to MySpace because it was more stable.
Yeah, that's funny. I do remember that. That was a long time ago. Yeah, interesting.
Super long ago, yeah.
I'm curious then. So I guess that your action sports kind of social network got you kind of interested in also doing journalism and, being a speaker and a panel moderator and, your podcasting and like, how did you kind of transition from, the action sports thing into, more of a tech kind of thing? I get that you were doing some tech stuff, but.
So it's actually vice versa. So I was into tech and journalism. I was a journalist like all through. I actually started a school magazine in junior high school, and then I was an editor for the feature section of my high school paper, and then I ran my journalism program at my high school.
Oh, wow.
So like I was a journalist and early tech adopter first. And then I built I was kind of a tomboy. My dad would take me to like motocross events and stuff like that. So I was like, then it was just about like, I didn't think of myself as a startup or business. I mean, I don't even think I knew this terminology back then. I just like, I think action sports were awesome. And at that time it was extreme sports. So I was like, I think like extreme sports are awesome. And I love the computer. Like how my dad would always like, my dad was like so cool and being supportive of the technology because like he would buy me like ThinkPad laptops, which was like a really big deal back then, like the IBM ThinkPads.
Totally, everybody had them.
Right? So like, well, no, like not everybody. Like it was like really cool, but they didn't. Not everybody had a Mac like they do today.
Yeah, fair.
I think to have a laptop at all was like kind of a big deal back then. You know?
That's true.
And so I was just kind of exposed to this stuff, and then eventually I started companies before my sports company. I started a scuba diving e-commerce shop, which I call my starter company.
Okay.
But like I just went through all these life experiences, and in that time, what happened was because I did social media stuff, like a term that makes me want to gag, like before the term social media existed. When this thing social media came out, I was naturally like a leader in social media, or like people perceive me to be that way.
Sure.
Because I'd already been doing it for my video company. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it wasn't like on purpose.
Yeah.
And so then I got asked to speak on social media at all these different events and stuff. And I had read Tim Ferriss's book before he was well known, which was random because I was outsourcing like way before that was a thing as well. Like I found my first outsourcing team on Elance.
Right.
And so like that's around the time I had discovered Tim Ferriss after I'd started outsourcing. I was like, oh, let me get better at this thing that I'm doing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And he, I think, had talked about like speaking or something like that. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to like train myself to, you know how to do this. So I actually took a gig with like a teaching company, and I would give these like mini seminars with Media Bistro, and I would give these mini seminars for like years on social media's business strategy. And so for me, that was like my practice ground to become a great speaker. And my mom is actually one of the best speakers in the world. She's been on David Letterman and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, I had a lot to live up to because my mom is amazing. So I'm like, okay, if my mom's amazing, I can't be like one of these like fly-by-night speakers. I have to be like really create an impact, you know?
No, totally.
So,
pressure's on.
Yeah. So, and I'm sure it helped like growing up with her and seeing her be a dynamic speaker. So but you have to practice. Like, I mean, you can't just be something. You have to like hone your skills. So I did that with Media Bistro, and then eventually like other people started contracting me to speak at their events, and then I started, and at the same time I was moderating panels. But what I found was this is why like I don't believe in like social media gurus and all this kind of stuff. Like I just don't think the world needs another social media expert. And like I like to create value where value is needed, right?
Sure,
so,
totally agree.
Like even though I wouldn't say, like, even though like people seem to have a really positive experience over like when I give a keynote or something like that, I just don't think another keynote speaker is needed in the world. We have like amazing speakers. Like you see them on TED Talks all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, I think there are not enough panel moderators who care about moderating a panel effectively. Like I actually think that's a really important need. And it's been an incredibly rewarding experience to have people come up to me like way after my panel, like months, years later, and say, you know, that panel you did way back when, like that taught me so much, that changed my life. And I'm like, what? Like a panel moderator changed
Really?
You know what I mean?
So
yeah.
What do you think makes a good panel moderator then? I'm curious.
My God. First of all, caring. Most people moderate panels because they want to attract clients. Most people are on panels because they want to attract clients because they're just trying to like make a quick buck.
Sure.
Like I'm not on a panel to do any of that. I'm on a panel because I see the 18-year-old version of myself sitting in the audience, and I want to be there for that girl. I want to make sure she has everything she possibly needs to get to where she wants to go, because she is hustling and hustling hard and risking everything to achieve a dream, and I'm not going to let her down. So like that's who I see, and that means everybody on the panel is accountable to me. And if a speaker is like not really caring on a panel, they're not going to be on my panel because that's not tolerated, not accepted. Like the only people allowed on my panel are people who want to give actionable insights to the audience. They're speaking to the audience, not for their own egos. And like that those people could walk away and that afternoon implement the lessons they've learned. And that's the only way you can be on one of my panels. And I have a pre-call with the panelists, and I make sure they know. So, and if they're trying to pull any of the shenanigans during the panel, I have no problem calling them out. I don't have a problem with confrontation, but I do it in a way where no one's embarrassed, or like I do it in a fluid way. I mean, you've seen me on a panel, right?
Yeah.
I don't seem like but like
no, you were awesome. You know how many notes I took during that panel that I saw you guys on? Oh, it was awesome. It was insane how many, like a lot, so much of that stuff helped with actually doing this show.
Yeah.
So yeah, like tools and tips and, you know, it was awesome. It was totally worth it.
Yeah, I mean, people's times are valuable, and now in a day and age where we have so many options, the last thing I want to do is waste your time or waste my time. So that's why I make sure that whatever I'm involved with, I'm consistently creating value where value is actually needed, where there's a pain point being addressed, not just because like I'm like existing. I don't know. I can't even imagine that. You know, that's just crazy to me.
Well, and I think people know whether people are up there being kind of fake and trying to recruit business, or you legitimately care about, what you're talking about, the people that are on the panel, and, the people asking questions and whatnot. People can tell,
Right.
really quick.
Totally.
So how do you, if somebody wanted to kind of, become a panel moderator, is there a kind of a way to get into it? You just kind of ask? Do you set up your own panels?
That's so funny. So no one's ever asked me that question. So I just became a panel moderator. I get asked all the time, but I think if someone wanted, there's so many opportunities. Well, one, I think it's extremely difficult to moderate a panel. So, it's extremely difficult to moderate a panel well. Like, it's really easy to have a junk panel because they're just existing, and the moderator is typically like silent and they don't say nothing at all, or they like yes you, they don't contribute anything to the panel. If you want to have a panel that's actually worth someone's time, like, you're guiding a conversation, you're using a journalism background, you're understanding when to stop someone when someone's talking too long, you consistently have the audience in mind, you're moderating a panel, like, as we've talked about, I have the We Are LA Tech podcast, and my podcast was number two in the country on New and Noteworthy, right? Mm-hmm. And for me, I think what contributed to that is that, like, I view having a podcast as scaling moderating a panel. Like, I am so passionate about moderating a panel that I'm like, oh, podcasting, I could reach people outside of just a physical room, right? It's awesome. So, like, when we're on a podcast, like, I'm constantly thinking about the audience, like, making sure this is important. When I'm editing a podcast episode, I'm editing it for the person listening. I'm not just putting out anything because if it's too long, if there's too many ums and ahs, if there's a boring part, if there's something that's been repeated, like, I want to take all that out because I value someone's time,
Sure.
And so, like, in moderating a panel, it's thinking about the audience the whole time through. So let's say you get the tangent person or the ego person that's just talking and talking and talking because they like to hear their own voice. You have to delicately, but in an abrupt way, but delicately, it's a very, very fine talent, cut them off. Like, it is not okay to monopolize, because you have other people on the panel and you want to make sure the value is getting addressed. And if the theme of the panel, if those answers aren't being provided, then you have to grill in to make sure that the panelists are providing the answers. And I like to be very interactive with the audience, and I want to find out why they're there, what inspired them to be there, what questions they want answered. And then at the end, I want to make sure I'm accessible so that if they didn't get something answered or they were too shy to ask, that they could reach out afterward and I could get those answered from the other panelists for them. It's about the success of an audience. It's not about someone's ego. And that's the main thing to remember in moderating a panel.
Interesting. Yeah, I never really thought of it like that, but it does make a lot of sense. And I'm curious, do you get a lot of people reaching out to you after and say, I saw you moderate this panel, my question didn't get answered, I was too scared to ask? Do you actually get a lot of that?
I wouldn't say it's a lot, and I don't think I've ever gotten too scared to ask because I don't think they would feel like, I think that takes a lot of guts to even share that into,
Sure.
So I wouldn't know. But yeah, I have at times like, hey, I didn't get this. But no, normally I'm really good at getting all the questions answered, like really, really good at it.
Sure.
So because I grill them, I'm like, anything else until I don't see any more hands raised.
Sure.
So they're not as often as you'd think, but I do get them. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. So you mentioned the We Are LA podcast. So kind of maybe let's step back a little bit. Like, how did you get into podcasting, and kind of why did you want to get into podcasting? And then, let's transition to kind of, what We Are LA Tech podcast is. And
sure. So the We Are LA Tech podcast is the first podcast focused on LA startups, and it's the only podcast still that focused on LA startups. And it's awesome. I got into podcasting because in 2012 I created a video series called We Are LA Tech, for interviewing LA startups, because I had missed creating that video content with my sports company.
Right.
And unfortunately, the 12 episodes we shot weren't able to get edited, and it broke my heart. It just totally broke my heart. So when I discovered the world of podcasting, thanks to my friend Mark, who is the founder of Beta List, Mark is super into podcasts. So, and Mark lives in Europe, and I went backpacking through Europe, and I got back from Europe, and I wanted to stay in touch with my friends in Europe. So I decided to get an iPhone, which I didn't have before. I had an Android.
Okay. Yeah.
So I decided to get an iPhone so I could FaceTime. But Mark ended up sending me all these podcasts. I'm like, oh, these are awesome, right? And I became this avid podcast listener. And then when I learned more about the world of podcasting, I realized that I could do it all myself. Like I would never ever have to rely on a video editor again.
Sure.
With podcasting, I could host, I could produce, I could schedule, and I could edit all by myself, and all with affordable. Well, I didn't know this at the time, but this is what I sought out to discover, all with affordable tools, right?
Sure.
So then I was like, wow, podcasting involves so many of my favorite things. Involves like moderating a panel, involves connecting people, et cetera, so forth. So I just decided to like give it a go, and obviously it's working out.
No, sure.
But, yeah.
I think that's part of the problem with a lot of people is they just don't have the courage to just go for it one day. Who cares if you fail, right? Most people don't remember the failures.
It's not about who cares if, okay, that's so American. You're supposed to be Canadian, man, not American. Like, it's not who cares. Failing sucks.
Sure it does.
It's emotional, and trust me, every last thing I failed at, I care about. Like, it hurts, but the thing is, like, you'll never discover what's possible if you don't move forward. So I promised myself when I started the podcast, no matter what, whether I knew what to do or didn't know what to do, I would take a step forward every day. And I made a promise to myself, and I was scared because like I have failed before, and I'm scared of failing. And so what I do is I just don't let that fear control me. I'm like, hi, scared, I see you. Cool, you could hang out over there. I'm going to do my thing over here.
That's interesting.
And then I like keep moving forward. So I'm scared all the time. Like I'm scared that things aren't going to work out, and like all the time, every day. One of my friends called me the other day and said something like, oh, it's good though that you're doing everything safely or something, because he was thinking about taking some risk in his life. And so I was like, what do you mean I'm doing everything safely? He's like, oh, well, you're fine because you wouldn't be doing all this stuff if you weren't fine. I was like, fine. I was like, I'm risking it all again. Like, there's no fine. Like I'm risking it all to make shit happen. Like whether it works out or not, I have no idea. He's like, well, what do you do if you don't work out? It doesn't work out. I'm like, I don't know, but I'll deal with that if that ever comes, you know?
No, it totally makes sense. Yeah, no, that's cool. So, what exactly so you're covering startups in LA and you're interviewing them. And I know that you're working on a Women in Tech podcast. Right. Sorry?
Yes.
So when is that launching? I'm curious.
So it's launching sooner than later. However, the thing that I want to do different from the Women in Tech podcast versus the We Are LA Tech podcast is I want to have sponsors before we go live, because I want to integrate the sponsors into the episodes.
Right.
So I actually have been having meetings with different brands that potentially want to sponsor the podcast. And then once that deal closes, I'm looking for like a premier sponsor. And so once that deal closes, then they will go live.
But you've recorded a bunch of shows, correct?
No, I've scheduled. So all the amazing women in tech, I've scheduled tentative dates to do the interviews with them. And then I'll record them when everything else closes. And
I'm assuming they're all across America, North America, the world?
They're everywhere, yeah. They could be anywhere in the world. They just have to be engaging to listen to and communicate English well, because I mean it is like primarily an English speaking audience that's listening.
Sure.
And things of that nature.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So I think this is a super important topic. Though there is such a shortage of just women in the industry, and I think in a lot of cases, well, the funny thing is, the first programmer ever was a woman. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
really?
Yeah, it's crazy. And in theory, according to I don't know, some study that I read years ago, that I think like a lot of women have better programmer minds than a lot of guys do. So just a lot of guys have kind of driven women out of the industry a little bit, right? Just through the reasons, and it's sad. And I think there's like, what you're doing in that podcast is super important. And I know, there's other organizations that are like Ladies Learning to Code that is big up here. And I think it's like a global thing now where, they're teaching, girls how to code. And, I've volunteered at a couple before in town here. And, it's awesome to see, people coming into the industry, right?
Totally. But I don't feel the same. So you're saying guys have driven women out and stuff. I mean, I think everybody has a different life experience. For me personally, in my own journey, I've never felt held back. I think
Well, that's good.
I think the main, and I've never felt a guy. If anything, I felt a lot of guys have been my allies. And I think it's been an advantage that I've been a woman in tech because I'm kind of like a novelty
Sure.
right now. So I see a ton of positive for being a female in tech. However, I think the one thing that is and this is what inspired me to create the Women in Tech podcast is that, you know, like the 4 minute mile, the first time that someone ran nobody ran it, and then the first time someone ran it, then a ton of other people ran it in the same year. I think it's that concept. I think it's all about believing what's possible and believing we can, and then it changes our whole mindset. So before someone ran the 4 minute mile, people didn't believe it was possible. Once someone ran the 4 minute mile, then it became possible, and other people's brains mindset shifted, and then they were able to accomplish the same thing physically. So my Women in Tech podcast is, the goal of it is, and the theme is to share stories from women founders, women engineers, women investors, female journalists, all in tech, of who was their mentor, where, how did they learn, how to be in the technical space, like what were their jobs, when did they realize they were passionate about technology, and keep them really short interviews. And so females, women, it doesn't matter what age, can see what's possible. Like they have this like tangent thing. Oh, if she can do it, so can I. And then I think that will be a positive shift for the people that are just kind of like holding back because maybe they're nervous, you know?
Totally.
But I think it's not so much that like I don't feel oppressed. I just think it's a belief issue, and that could go for both men and women, of just not believing something's possible, right?
No, totally. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm glad that you're doing it. I'm really interested in checking it out when it's out. Do you have a rough timeline, or you don't know yet?
I mean, really, it's just like yesterday.
Oh, okay.
So it's a daily podcast, excluding weekends. So that's a crazy amount of content, but I wanted to feature as many women as possible. And like with the We Are LA Tech podcast, the way I produce it, I'm not able to feature every single startup I'd love to feature.
Sure.
So I purposely wanted to produce women in tech in a different way. Producing the content, et cetera, so forth. Like, so I don't know. That's why the sponsorship is so important, because it takes so much production in order to get it out, that I don't know like what date will make sense, but sooner than later.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's all when the contracts and deals are signed.
So how?
And I will only work with a sponsor that I personally feel really passionate about.
Right.
So that limits, it can only be companies, one, that I care about authentically and can afford to be a premier sponsor, and have an interest in tech, and have an interest in women in tech. That's a lot. It's,
Right.
really narrow it in.
So are you reaching out to those sponsors, or they're kind of contacting you, or a little bit of both?
It's been a little bit of both.
Okay.
Like the one I'm meeting with tomorrow, who I think is going to end up being the sponsor. Actually, I met them like at Silicon Beach Fest. I was like walking around, and the way I met them is so funny. I have the We Are LA Tech Experience Club, which is where LA startup entrepreneurs and people who work in LA startups do offline activities together. And it's exclusive to the We Are LA Tech Experience Club. Anyway, we're doing this bonfire, or I'm preparing to do this bonfire activity. And so I want these different games and activities at the bonfire.
Okay.
And so it's at Silicon Beach Fest, which is a conference in LA with like people in tech and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, Ephraim puts that on, right? And his friend, is that right?
No, Kevin Winston puts it on from Digital LA.
Oh, okay.
But TechZulu is a media sponsor.
Right, that's it. Okay.
So at Silicon Beach Fest, there was this company, and they had the games where you throw the beanbag into the thing, and they had these other games. I was like, oh man, do you think I could borrow them for the bonfire? And they're like, yeah, totally, no worries. I'm like, yeah, I have the We Are LA Tech podcast and the Women in Tech podcast. They're like, oh, tell us about the Women in Tech podcast, So it was like this thing that all started with the bonfire, me just wanting this game for the bonfire.
That's awesome. I love stories like that, how you just kind of randomly meet people that work out, right? You have tons of projects on the go. What's your kind of...
Well, no, not tons of projects. So I do We Are LA Tech full time.
Sure.
And so everything is We Are LA Tech related. So Women in Tech is a We Are LA Tech production. So there's
Okay.
nothing that I do that's not We Are LA Tech. Like the mobile app that we built is the We Are LA Tech mobile app. The private chat group is the We Are LA Tech chat group. Everything is We Are LA Tech.
Right. Okay. No, that makes sense.
And then you and I know each other because of my blog, which is not We Are LA Tech, but my blog is like Save Business Time.
Yeah.
So, but that's like my blog. Like a blog is a blog.
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And then you promote, your different things there. So the other thing that I think we should mention with We Are LA Tech is you promote tons of events that are happening that are related to you and not related to you.
Yeah, so We Are LA Tech. So the way We Are LA Tech started, as I mentioned, in 2012, we had the video series, and because it was taking a long time editing the episodes, which ended up never getting edited.
Do you still have them?
Sigh. Yes, and I still want to get them edited. That's a whole nother story. I'm like dying to still have these. I don't care if even the startups don't exist anymore. I don't want that to go for nothing. Like I promise these people something and I want to deliver. But beside that, so I created the calendar at the time, and LA was not like how it is today with like an event happening like 5 events happening every night. So I created the calendar to keep up the momentum while I waited for the videos to be edited,
Sure.
And then I just maintained the calendar as a community service over the years, and on the website, wearelatech.com. And then one day, like I was talking to one of my friends who really believes in We Are LA Tech and what I'm doing here. And I guess this is when I started kind of like. So 2012, it was just like a community service, and then I did my own thing, and then I started the podcast. And so now I had the podcast and this calendar, so it started to become a thing, right? So then my friend believed in it, and then out of nowhere he just built the We Are LA Tech mobile app. It was amazing. And so now with the mobile app, you could add any event, any LA startup event happening in one swipe onto your personal calendar on your phone. And we built it for both iPhone and Android using Ionic.
Okay, yeah, I've used Ionic. It's quite awesome, actually.
It's amazing, right?
Yeah.
So the iPhone one is in private beta and it's going to be public soon. And then after we'll release the Android one. And then, so it's just like, it's kind of like everything coming together, but it's all a part of We Are LA Tech.
Oh, no, that's awesome. So do you know roughly when that'll be out?
The mobile app?
Yeah.
I don't know, like I'm hoping it's out like yesterday. I know the developer wants it. It's Ira Herman. He's amazing. Check him out on Twitter at Ira Herman, IRAHERMAN. But yeah, we both want it out like yesterday. So I think it'll probably be out anywhere from a week to 3 weeks. We have to like wait for the Apple approval and stuff like that.
Yeah, that can take a couple of weeks. I'll post the note or the links in the show notes too. So
that'd be great.
Yeah, and I'll post all your links. Yeah, so I'm curious then, how did you get writing for TechZulu?
So that was totally random. Actually, funny for me story. So I had my action sports company. I was a journalist already, all through growing up. But nobody knows that about me, really, right? Like, it's just kind of this random thing. And so I had hired Efren to shoot one of my panels for my sports company. I produced a panel at my sports company. And so I hired Efren, who owns TechZulu, to shoot it for us. And we formed this relationship. And then I went, I think, to Blog World or something. And one of Efren's journalists couldn't make it. So he asked if I would write something on Blog World or something like that. I can't remember what conference it was. I'm pretty sure it was Blog World. And I'm like, yeah, sure, no worries. And so I come back and I turn in this thing to him. He's like, whoa, you really know how to write. I'm like, yeah, I actually have a background as a journalist. He's like, I had no idea. And so he's like, will you write for TechZulu? I'm like, wow, what a huge compliment. Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. I was like, but only under one condition. He's like, what's that? I was like, that I could just write when I feel inspired to write, that I'm not like contracted to write and have to, because I write when I'm like, I write from like the heart and like, I don't know, it just, I don't want to be like in some confined box writing, And he's like, yep, totally cool. And so my whole career has been, doing whatever I do. Like I do We Are LA Tech full time or whatever I've done in the past. And then I do TechZulu like on the side. I call it my after hours thing. And it's always been whatever like X is plus TechZulu. Like I'm so proud to be part of the TechZulu team. I moderate a ton of panels for TechZulu. Like I've helped produce some of the Tech Zulu tech crawls where we go from startup to startup. It's like a beer crawl, but startups in LA. Like, I love Tech Zulu. I love Efren. I love everything they stand for.
No, that's awesome. It's interesting that you say that, because I'm kind of the same way when I write stuff for them too. I usually find I need to be a little bit tired, and I usually write on my Nexus 7. I don't actually write on a laptop, which is weird.
Oh, cute. I love it. I have a Nexus 7.
Yeah, I don't know why. I find like I can't write on a laptop very well. Like I did a book last year for a publisher out of the UK.
Yeah.
And I wrote most of it on the computer. Actually, I wrote it most of.
To ask you a question. What's
Sure.
the keyboard you use for the Nexus 7?
Oh, I use the touchscreen keyboard, which
Shut
is
your
I
mouth.
know. No, totally.
No.
That's what I mean.
You're
It's
crazy.
insane because it doesn't make any logical sense.
No,
And it takes
none.
I think partly what it is before I type out a sentence, because it's such an issue to edit it and it takes so long, that before I type it out, I want it to be perfect. And so like I don't really edit the content after that much.
That's amazing.
But yeah, I write it all on that. So,
That's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know why it makes. Every time I tell people that, they're just like, "There's no way you write that stuff on that." I'm like, "Yeah." And then I usually edit it quickly, a little bit, I guess, on the computer. Usually a Chromebook. I don't really like. I have a Mac and everything, but for the most part, I just use the Nexus 7 and the Chromebook to do my writing. It's weird. I don't know what
That's crazy.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm curious though, what advice would you give to kind of people that are up and coming and, want to do a podcast or moderate a panel or just kind of do their own thing, You're involved in all this stuff, right? And
Totally. I would I mean, number one, I think what is pitched and promoted out there of this, like, drinking a margarita on the beach kind of life is not like something that happens overnight, and sometimes it doesn't happen at all, and it's just a lot of hard work. Like, I work a lot.
Sure.
Like a lot, right? Mm-hmm. And everybody has a different story, but I would say, well, the two things I say in all my talks, I say two things, is create your own journey, like it's your own storyline, and then I say your intuition is your oracle. But putting those two things aside is just knowing the reality that it doesn't happen, like, it's not some quick fix, and you want to work on things you feel really passionate about. That, like, what, for instance, I've had the LA Podcasters meetup since it's going to be a year next month, which is really exciting.
Totally.
But I purposely
That's awesome.
did the LA Podcasters meetup because I love podcasting, and I purposely did it like a few blocks from my house, because if no one showed up on a Taco Tuesday, at least I could have Taco Tuesday dinner at a cool place, and it's not totally out of my way, right? And I don't do it because I'm hoping for some big numbers or I'm hoping for sponsorship or anything. I do it just because, like, I love it. Like, I love podcasting.
Sure.
And I show up every month, no matter how busy I am every month. I create it. I've never missed a month, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be like a return financially, because we all have bills to pay and this stuff. And I do believe in building a sustainable lifestyle. But like, what I'm saying is, first find that thing you're really into. So like, because like I'm super into podcasting and I consider myself a full-time podcaster, then I look for all the different, like, I experiment. I use experimentation often. So we get really stuck when we try to be perfect, and we don't move ahead at all. But if we just let every day be an experiment, we could see what works and see what doesn't work, and then we don't have to worry about it because we'll just know what works,
Totally.
And then if 100 things don't work, 100 things didn't work, and then try maybe 101 will. It's taking that time to experiment in different ways, seeing what's right for your industry, working on things that you feel really passionate about, and really being a part and thriving in that journey rather than trying to like have that margarita on the beach. Because like, I mean, I'm reading the book Remote Office Not Required right now by, Jason Fried, the guys who created 37 Signals and Basecamp.
Yep.
And it's all about creating your dream life currently, like not waiting to be retired, but like, how do you integrate your dream life into your current life? So it's really about like seeing the world in a different way and creating your own rules and trying to find a way to make your life work for you in a way that feels natural for you. So like, even in getting into podcasting, a lot of people want to get into podcasting, get these like ridiculously expensive courses, like $5,000, $10,000, and all this mic purchases. Yeah, and I'm like, no. I was like, I'm gonna learn. I've had a media company. I've already learned the hard way that like spending a ton of cash does not bring you like the ROI. So I'm just going to watch a crazy amount of YouTube videos and like just figure it out and see what's right for me. And that's how like I discovered the mics that work right for what I'm doing.
Sure.
And when you follow someone else's script, it really limits your ability to innovate. And I want to innovate through and through and find the pathway that worked best for me. I mean, I'm not saying not to follow other people or to like pay attention to what they're doing or to learn from seasoned people, but I'm saying at the end of the day, it's about creating your own story, your own journey. And if you decide that nothing anyone else says works for you, then that's fine. Like, perfect example, Apple. When they featured the podcast and when it hit number 2, they said, we highly suggest you make We Are LA Tech, we space, R space, LA space tech, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, no, doesn't look right to me. So I left it like without the spaces. So it's We Are LA Tech, one word, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I did do is then I added We Are LA Tech with spaces in other areas. So if people were searching on Google, that would come up too.
Right. No, that totally makes sense. Yeah, it's kind of like figuring out your own path and not really, what you don't bend, right, to what somebody tells you if you feel it's wrong, right? I've always kind of followed my...
And that's what I'm saying, your intuition is your oracle. Is that what you were about to say?
No, that totally makes sense because I've always followed my heart with any of the stuff I've ever done career-wise. Yeah. And, it seems to just work itself out. And, you're right. Some days things go sideways and sometimes you need to pick yourself up and say, okay, let's try something different. But I think that's the key, right? You talk to anybody that is successful, they just decide to go for it one day, and every time they hit like a roadblock, they just figure out how to go around it or go a different way, right? Yeah.
Totally, constantly. Like, come on now. Like, do I know if the Women in Tech podcast will work or get sponsors or blah, 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 blah? I don't know anything. I'm just taking steps forward every single day, doing the best that I can and following my intuition.
Sure. No, that's awesome. That's great advice, actually.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Appreciate the props.
No problem. So I will let you go. This has been awesome. And I will post, your website and your Twitter and We Are LA Tech and your Women in Tech podcast and a bunch of other links in the show notes online.
And you know what? If you guys listening have questions, like, totally feel free to tweet at me at Espree Devora. Like, I'm so like, happy to be a support in your life so you don't have to like, try to make your way through the murky waters. Like, just at Espree Devora on Twitter and I'll happily write you back.
And to be fair, you wrote back to me, so that's how you hooked me up with the Tech Zulu stuff and just coming to the podcast panel. I would have never made it to the podcast panel if I didn't reach out to you on Twitter when we were coming to LA a few months ago. So
isn't that crazy the way things work? Do you see what I mean about contributing in life in a valuable way so people's lives can actually be impacted rather than just simply existing?
No, I totally agree. Cool. I've connected so many people. Like, my buddy and I do a beer night meetup just with a bunch of web nerds, and we just basically go to a local pub, and there's no presentations, there's no nothing. And it takes literally all of 5 minutes a month to plan this thing. And we basically just book a venue. It's usually the same venue, or, we switch maybe a couple times a year.
Yeah.
And we basically just have a Facebook group, and we just send out the notice there. We promote it a little bit on Twitter, and we get anywhere from, I would say, 8 to 30 people in a month. And we just talk about, sometimes it's shop talk, sometimes it's just about anything. And that's been so awesome. Like, so many people have met that, like, I've gotten them jobs or they've gotten jobs because they met somebody there, or, you've become friends with these people. And it's not really necessarily like I don't make any money off of it, but I've grown so much and I've met so many local people, and it's just been awesome, right?
Totally.
And so it doesn't always have to be financially beneficial. I think just networking and getting out there and talking to other people that are, doing things, right? And it's been awesome. So
no, it doesn't always have to be financially beneficial, but I mean, in order to do what you love full time, it needs to sustain you, right? So
for sure.
I think to like approach people with trying to like get something back right away is a terrible approach. I think you should approach people from a way of like, what can you give, what can you offer, and establish that relationship. But then, like, in general in your life, know systematically, like, where is it that you make your money? Like, what is the product that you're selling? And so that way, like, and do you have the right product market fit so that people like are quick to want to purchase your product because it solves a pain point for them. And to know what that thing is in your life amidst like all the connectivity and events and all this stuff is really important, because if you don't even know what you sell and what the pain point is that you're addressing, then how are you ever going to make money on anything?
No, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, I think we'll end it there, but thanks very much for being on the show. Really appreciate it. And I think we should probably do another one once, your Women in Tech is kind of rocking and up and going.
I would love it. That'd be
awesome.
so rad, dude. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right. Well, you have a good one, and we'll talk later.
Definitely. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks for listening. If you're going to be in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, February 16th and 17th at the Startup Expo and want to meet up and record a show, reach out to me at buildingthefutureshow.com or on Twitter at buildingshow. The music for the show is provided by Electric Mantra. Check them out at electricmantra.com. Until next week.